Right, so, all I've said on Blackboard is that you create your own table for your rubric, for your standards elaborations. Based on these questions, I'm wondering if I should put a template up there. I didn't really want to do that because I wanted...
I don't think we need
I think
that.
it'll be fine. We can create one after of looking at those.
Maybe in the future they just need to like not count the criteria sheet for words, if you know what I mean.
Well, see, QCAA gives you the template,
Yeah.
really. Not a template which you can data enter, which I think is really unfortunate. You still have to create the table
Yeah,
in
you
Word
can just
and
copy
data
those.
enter it, but
That's
you
what I
can-
did, and that is still like 500 words once you do that. And then I fixed it and made it more
Yeah, you
specific.
can convert PDF to Word documents.
Yes, you can actually.
Oh, so download it, convert it, and then use it.
And then use it, and then add your like
That's
specific
cool.
things.
Or just have fun making a table
Yeah.
and procrastinate doing an actual work filling it in.
Okay, so this is our sample template,
For an hour.
which we talked about last week.
Oh, is that this one?
That's what it looks like.
Whereabouts is that one?
That's in week
I just
9.
found it.
Okay, so where's, can you go back to what you have? Which one? Okay, because so are we allowed to make it look slightly different? Because the one in week 9 is very like not pretty.
I would like you
Like
to
there's
keep
lots
it.
of block black, and it's not really
Does
set
it
up
look like
like that.
this?
No.
No, not really.
Similar.
It's similar.
I'm sure you
Made
can
it
change the
blue.
format of it.
Can we
Like
put
Yeah,
change the
so it's-
colouring.
So as long as the formatting is as long as you keep that format, you can make it as pretty as you want. You can
Okay.
change the
Can I
grading.
put like a little like a heading up the top for pretend school and
Yeah, you can. Yes, yes.
we have to do it on that template.
Yeah.
What I want to be able to do is go to specific places for the information that I need, and that's why I've given you a template. So you can make it as pretty as you want, but as long as you've got text in all the right places in that order, then that's fine. Is that clear? Yes.
What about those of us who are anything but confident with actually making our own template like that? Like, seriously, I've never done anything like that.
There's
No,
Word.
it's
No,
on Blackboard.
it's
We
on
have to
Blackboard.
use the
Oh, there is a
Blackboard one.
template.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Where is it? Sorry?
Week 9.
Week 9.
Week
That's it there.
It's just
Oh, that's much better. That's much better. Is there something similar for the rubric?
No.
Because, for example, I wouldn't know how to flip the words up like that
we
at the
just
side.
covered this.
I've just never done that
Just
in my
watch the
life.
video.
So,
Watch the video.
so how important is that?
Oh no.
I think you need to learn.
Right.
And
we
I
just
think
said-
IT will help you, and I can actually show you this afternoon if you want, at the end of this lesson. I can show you, it's really easy, it's very quick.
Not all of us have sugar.
So,
Yeah, it's week 9. I was doing about it.
okay, so we've talked about rubric, we've talked about QCAA. I want you to read this task very quickly and answer that question at the top. Does this task satisfy the principles of quality assessment?
Oh lordy.
Speed read.
It's the first template.
That one just says
Yeah.
Let's assume it's year 9. That's actually a really loaded question. That's a really, really hard question to answer. does this satisfy the principles of quality assessment is huge. There are lots of things going on in your head now that you know are those principles. And a lot of information in that template to process. So, what we're going to do is have a look at a checklist to help us do that, to break it apart. But that feeling you had then was, I don't know, there's so much to think about, is an important emotion to experience as an educator. So I'm going to give you... Actually, I'll do this way, because it's okay.
I think
I
it
get
goes
out
a bit
there.
reading over it and reading over it. I printed it out. In middle class.
So this is on the QCAA website.
It does help, but then it's like,
So let's have a look at this checklist. You have validity on one side and accessibility on the other. Let's just scan accessibility first because it's probably the easiest to understand. It's not necessarily the easiest to do. You have a look at it. Look at the words. Language has been made accessible to students. Clear instructions. Sometimes we think we're giving really clear instructions, but they're not clear at all. That's why it's a good idea to give your task to someone else to have a look at and get feedback on. Is this clear? That's what schools do now. The English department might give it to the history department, which might give theirs to the language department, and so on, and say, is this okay? Does this make sense to you? Because remember, you've got multiple audiences. You've got parents, students, colleagues, probably principal, whoever. They're going to come along and look at it. So, clear instructions. Common sense. Not necessarily easy to do. Do you avoid social, gender or cultural bias? Have a look at the students in your class group. How are you going to make sure that every word on that task sheet is understood by those students? Especially ads. And given the complexity of language, and I suppose that's where choice is very important, isn't it, with these students? You let them choose what they're capable of working with and what they consider to be relevant. Are you going to let them use subtitles? That's a way of showing differentiation. You might say to your students when you show your, when you've got, in your blog, when you've got a screenshot of a particular section of that ad, you might allow the subtitles to be there. That's pretty cool. So accessibility, are there any colloquialisms? Do you avoid specialist terminology or jargon that is irrelevant? In English we use the word representation all the time, we use the word perspective all the time, genre, audience, context, purpose. That's not jargon, that's a necessary part of our subject. In fact, if you're not using that language, you need to make sure it's there because that's our meta language. Do you model accurate textual features? We are English teachers, we can't have tasks going out with full stops in the incorrect place, missing commas, capitalised letters in the wrong place. We need to model what we're asking of our students. In terms of the format and the layout, I've given you a template to help you, but even within that template, there's lots of white space. So are you going to do lots of bold, underlining and italics? No, I'm not. Capital letters everywhere. You'd be surprised at what some people will do to their fonts.
So we're not allowed to bold important things.
You absolutely can,
Oh.
but I would only ever use one enhancement.
Okay, so
So format and layout is very important because it can be too busy, it can hit people too hard and prevent them from understanding the direction. So if you're bolding keywords that you think are really important, but suddenly you find yourself bolding 8 words in a 12-word sentence. Yeah. Drop the bolding.
Yeah.
Is your instrument clear, appropriate and sequenced? Are the task instructions positioned appropriately? Is response space necessary? Not in our case, not in English. Have you got images or diagrams, which you probably won't have? So this is a checklist that's on the QCWA website. It's there for everybody, and it's for every subject. It's not English specific, which is why it's got those things there. So that's accessibility. That actually is similar to equity in this unit. That's what we're talking about, equity, making sure students can access the task. Validity now is very important. Is the assessment instrument fit for purpose? Are you actually measuring what you're supposed to measure according to what ACARA says and QCAA say? So validity, we talk about consequential validity, we talk about construct validity and content validity. Construct is just how your task is constructed. So we'll break that down in a minute. The content validity is the what students are actually having to do. So in this case it's ads. That's the content. That's the content validity. You're not going to ask them to analyse a film because that's the wrong content. It's not valid in this instance. So you just got to make sure. I don't think many English teachers would get that wrong. It's so self-evident. So if you have a look at the first cell there, note you've got 3 columns. You've got the validity, which is the characteristic. You've got yes or no, and you've got the action required. So you could create a task sheet, give it to someone else, and say, can you please fill it in for me? The first cell is about the subject matter. Does the assessment instrument provide the opportunity for students to cover the required subject matter for the unit topic? So if you give me a task sheet that's about analysing a film, then that's a no. If it's about ads, and it satisfies that brief, the components in that brief, then that would be a yes. So, think about what's in that brief. 2 ads. If it's 2 print texts, doesn't cut it, does it? It's a print text and a film ad. The instrument-specific standards matrix, so that's the rubric we've been talking about, which is very, very important. It does a heading. Does it match the syllabus standards? In this case, we're not talking about syllabus, we're talking about standards elaborations, ACARA. Is it contextualised? We've talked about that. Have you contextualised that rubric or not? Does it include only the objectives the instrument assesses? What we find, generally across the board, is that some schools will leave in all the standards elaborations. They won't delete any of them that don't apply. That's really confusing. It's an eyesore as well. There's way too much there. Lean and mean, lots of white space, only what absolutely has to be there. And that's part of contextualising. So get rid of those ones that are not being assessed in that instrument. The assessment instrument assesses what it was intended to assess. So there is alignment. We've talked about this between the response and the cues. It provides opportunity to demonstrate the required syllabus objectives. The cognition required, can you underline cognition please? Circle it, highlight, do something with it. The cognition aligns with the cognition identified in the standards matrix. So if you've done what you're meant to do, you've gone to the achievement standards, then you've gone to the QCAA standards elaborations, and now you're writing your task, and you know what's required of Year 9 students, which is what in terms of cognition? Analyse. What is it for Year 10s? Evaluate and analyse. They actually do both, analyse and evaluate. What is it for Year 8?
Explain.
Explain. Yeah. So you can see that relationship. So make sure that you're using that cognition in your task statement. Because your students probably won't analyse if you don't make it very explicit to them that they must analyse that cognition.
Have more than one cognition than if they're comparing.
Ah.
They are,
Identified as well.
well, like if they're comparing 2 ads, they are analysing. So are you like, but they're comparing. So in your sheet if you're using both
I would,
and they're both in your criteria?
I would use both in that instance.
Yeah, okay.
I'd use compare and analyse. You can't just use compare.
Yeah.
Because compare might
Yeah,
just be
it might be-
identifying. Identify the colours used in that ad and that ad. That's red, that's blue. That's not analysis, that's just identifying activity. So they need to know that they have to analyse, that they have to compare their analysis of each.
Yeah.
It's a good question. If you turn the page now, the assessment instrument provides opportunity for students to produce note. How many times we have heard provides opportunity for students. You should underline that, brand it into your brain because we use that everywhere, right throughout schooling system, right through the end of grade 12. Our assessment instruments must provide the opportunity for students to, whatever. To produce a response that aligns with the purpose of the technique. So what's the purpose of this technique? This one. Analyse.
Oh, you mean the task.
It is actually to inform too though,
Yeah,
isn't
to
it?
inform audience.
But the most dominant one
analyse.
is analyse.
Okay.
Yeah. That's another check. And are you wording your task sheet in such a way that the student is going to write a blog? We know it's an extended response, it's not a short response. They're actually writing an extended response, it's more than 100 words. Does the task follow the conventions required? No. Instrument conditions match those identified. So have you come up with your own conditions or are you using the ones that have been provided to you? It's extraordinary how many schools have used the incorrect conditions on task sheets in the senior space. So the syllabus might say 800 to 1,000 words and we've seen 1,500 words
Yeah,
and
I've seen that too.
2,000.
I've seen that too. And I'm like, what the hell? That's not right. I do that at uni and you're like 17.
And how is that equitable? How can a student in Cairns be forced to
Yeah,
write
my
2,000?
cousin's
Not there.
She's from Cairns.
Why can Cairns students not write essays?
They can, but we're saying it's
Just saying, what if the teachers in Cairns get them to write 1,000 words? Say a teacher in Brisbane got them to write.
Oh, I thought you said why that's not equitable.
Yeah,
Look at the
but
students in
North.
Cairns.
They're not capable.
The heat kills them after a while.
Exactly.
You can't write more than 600 words at a time.
and that's
It's the
equity.
humidity.
That's equity, which is one of our principles. So same for everyone. And I will make sure I let you know. In week 9 I'll put that link. It's called ICIQ or something. And it tells you the lengths for year 8, year 9, year 10. It gives you the guide on how much students should be writing for any particular year level. Scope and scale. Allow students to complete the response within the syllabus conditions. Now I have to jump up and down on the spot about this. This is the thing that most schools, not most schools, this is the issue we see most of the time when a task is not right. The scope and scale is out. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you ask students to write 800 words, that's what Clara suggests, or 600 words, whatever it might be, and you have written this task, but it actually requires students to write 1,000 words to get to the discerning qualifier, you're out of scope and scale. The fact that you actually have to write an annotated sample student response for this task is a test. You're actually being encouraged to test your own assessment instrument in this example, because if you can't do it within that word count, year 9 students aren't going to be able to do it in that word count. So scope and scale is tightly connected to the conditions. In fact, scope and scale is all about the conditions, because every student has to be able to demonstrate what they can do according to their standards. So A students have to be able to write to a discerning level. If your task statement is asking to do too much, 3 ads for example, 4 ads, how is a year 9 student or anyone going to be able to write discerning analysis within 600 words on 4 ads or 5 ads?
My mum said when they were in year 12 for English, they had to write 40 poems. Like 40
Jeez.
poems for their last English assessment.
Jeez.
I'm like, what the heck? And they had 2 weeks.
Oh,
So
yeah,
good.
imagine
Like I get that was a long time ago, but I was still like,
Imagine they could write a book of
You
that.
just write a bunch of haikus.
40. 40 17-year-olds angsty poems per student. Can you
Life
imagine
is
the pain
dead.
of marking
Life
that?
is dead.
Oh,
Like those
Oh,
Instagram poems, the sea. I love
yeah,
it.
it's basically it's basically like being on Tumblr is what that is.
They didn't have
So-
that. That's all it was.
Yeah, how do they express
Yeah,
themselves?
exactly. That's what I mean. That's their Tumblr.
So I want you to think about this. If you said this on a task sheet, analyse the representations in a play, is that, let's say you got 1,200 words, is that a fair and reasonable task to ask of a student?
What representation?
Exactly.
I was confused from the beginning.
I've got the right cognition in there,
Yeah,
analyse,
analyse.
so that's a tick,
Yeah.
but scope and scale is ridiculous. How
Yeah.
many different representations? 1,000?
Yeah.
Yeah, how many characters? Which character?
Exactly. Now compare that to analyse the representations of gender in a play.
Jonda.
Is that okay?
Jonda is my favorite.
Well, then again, you have. Are you talking about a certain type of play?
Well, assuming we're working with Macbeth.
Okay, cool. That's what I was making sure, because otherwise, if you're going to give students every play, you'd have to be familiar with those plays as well to understand the genders.
Okay, analyse the representations of gender in Macbeth. Is that Yep.
I'd be that student who'd be pedantic enough to go, oh cool, I've got a play you've never heard of, and here you
It's
go.
still big though. What about this? Analyse the representations of gender through a character in Macbeth.
Yeah.
You can see how it started there and the scope narrowed down.
Yeah.
I think the gender in Macbeth is still okay. Certainly not in exam conditions. I think that's too big for students. Seen exam, maybe unseen. I don't know. But you can see how analysing representation of gender through a character is a lot more doable to
Yeah.
that discerning level. But you have to be careful that you don't go too narrow either, because if you go too narrow, too small, students can't do anything with that either.
characters don't even see.
Yes. Or analyse this
Characters
quote
don't
and it's
die.
5 words. What's a student going to do with that? So they're the sort of things that you need to take into account. I've actually narrowed the scope and scale for you a little bit by asking for a print ad and a film ad.
Yeah.
But you can still lose scope and scale if you don't word it correctly and you don't think about how you're going to get students to tie those two ads together in a way that's going to be doable. So just keep that in mind. So I've helped you with scope and scale, but have a think about whether you're asking them still to do a little bit too much in your task statement. So scope and scale is a big thing. In the endorsement trials we had a QCAA, something like 67% had an issue with validity, and part of that was scope and scale was out of the area of reasonableness. And it's so easy to do, there's no judgment. It just takes a lot of careful thought when it comes to writing a task. And so scope and scale is just a range of knowledge and depth. Scaffolding, I've talked about this before, make sure you have it. And it's helping students, it's giving them a tip to do it successfully. If you don't have scaffolding on that task sheet, and you've got students where English is not their first language, and you haven't given them things like argue the thesis throughout, make sure it's cohesive, those sorts of things, as a little bit of a checklist. Your struggling students don't have a checklist there. You're not giving them that little bit of extra support they need to do the task successfully. That's what scaffolding is there for. It's just a reminder to do what they need to do in order to be successful. Because you might say, create a blog, but at no point do you give them some assistance in that structure. I know that there are lots of schools out there who for Year 12 will still say for an analytical essay, introduction, 3 main points of argument and conclusion. That helps your D and your E students. You don't give them too much, but you can give them just a little bit. Cohesive ties, those sorts of things. Yeah. So just be mindful of that as well. So this is an authentication strategy. Student work must be their own.
So on your template for that checklist thing, would you put that under scaffolding on the template you've given us? Because the template for so using that for authentication strategies, helping out with students using a checklist. Does that fall on because on the template I'm going for now, you've just got scaffolding there, but then on that template there, it's got checkpoints.
Yeah, so This is the information you'll be providing. You'll be giving us a context. You'll be writing a task statement. You'll be doing that or not doing that.
Yeah.
You'll be giving me checkpoints because it's not an exam.
Okay, cool. So that's just not on the. That's not on the.
Is that not on there?
Yeah, it's
No.
not on there.
That's
What's not on there? Checkpoint.
Really?
Yeah, checkpoints isn't on there.
But I quite like that.
I
I like
like
it.
Yeah, that's why I'm wondering whether that's scaffolding, whether that goes in that scaffolding section. That's all you got
Can we
in there is
just add our
scaffolding.
own checkpoints?
You can, but I'm going to make sure I do that like at 5:15 this afternoon.
Okay, cool, awesome.
that
So you're gonna add
needs
that.
to
So
be
I
on
just
there.
transfer it across.
Where does it go?
Very important. Just after to complete this task from us.
Before.
Did I save that? I did.
Wow, that's so bizarre.
That's something. So I was going through it. I'm going like I'm having trouble like looking for certain parts
Okay.
going there because it's
Thank
completely
you for
different.
that. That's
I
really cool.
like this template more than the weird
Yeah.
gold one.
That one on Blackboard is exactly this, but without the special grey,
And
shading.
without the checkpoints.
And without the checkpoints.
And without the individual lines for authentication.
Yes.
strategies.
The top
But
bit.
because you have to choose those.
Yeah.
You have to choose those.
So you just get rid of access to resources.
Well, what are you going to put there?
Oh no, I just find it weird that one.
Okay, open access to resources means you've got, you can talk to your parents, you can talk to your teacher,
Oh,
you can
okay.
talk to.
Oh, okay, cool. That's what you mean by that.
consult
Okay,
Google.
that makes more sense.
But
then,
you
yeah.
might want to word it differently.
Yeah.
That is not good language.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. Going like, I just don't get that. Yeah.
You can define that further. That would show differentiation.
Okay, cool.
You're going to choose how. You might just say student submits to turn it in. That's good enough. You might have one authentication strategy there.
So that's something that we make up.
Yes, you make
Okay.
that up. Yep. There's a whole list of them on the QCAA website.
Oh, yeah?
Good.
Scaffolding. Note the difference between scaffolding here and here. Note genre, audience, purpose, and context. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So, now that you know the checklist and we've been through the attributes of quality assessment, read this task and tell me if you think actually it is. Okay, I'm just going to tell you if it is. We're going to move on. It is valid and it is accessible and it is endorsable. Okay, so I'm going to do this super quickly because I want to get to the annotations today. This is out of scope and scale. Context statement, it's okay I suppose. Task is you are radio commentator for weekly segment titled Community. You will discuss the following individuals, so there's 3. They've got 4 to 6 minutes. They have to discuss them, define their impacts on society. They have to refer to evidence in the text that they use to research them. They have to state which of them should be used as a face for a campaign against discrimination. But what sort of discrimination? They have to include anecdotes about their own life experiences.
Why is
I'm
one a movie?
stressed already.
Why is one a movie and every single other one like for the resource available? They got one as a movie and then every other person is a famous person. But then you got a Twitter feed.
is a resource that is available.
Like Lincoln 2012 movie.
There's not much that's right about this.
Yeah.
Oprah
We're looking
Winfrey's
at-
Twitter feed.
And what about the cognitions? Like if you look at all the things that are wrong, cognitions we've got discuss, define, state, instead of persuade, the purpose is unclear. Subject matter is out of scope and scale. How can they possibly cover too many individuals? Etc., etc., etc. So it's a very, very bad assessment.
Would it pass?
No.
That would be a fail. Not even a 4, like not even a 51%.
There are other redeeming
You don't want them
features.
to have to like redo the subject.
But it would be difficult to argue the validity of the assessment instrument in your rationale, so it would have this domino effect. The issue would creep into other parts of your assessment.
Well, if you just basically trust your own assessment, like there's no
Anyway,
validity.
stop, we have to keep going. We have to keep going. You're doing the whole student thing, distracting me.
We would never.
Annotations. QCAA website. These links are in week 9.
Oh, yeah.
Alright, so you would have seen them. This is actually the language from the syllabus. Because this is year 11. But that language for you is going to come from the standards elaborations.
Okay.
So that's all you do. You write your blog, you put your images in and your captions for your images, And you highlight bits and pieces. I drew a diagram the other week, and I've got a template on Blackboard, week 9. All you need to do is choose particular standards and elaborations from your own rubric, highlight sections and tell me where that discerning characteristic is and what it is. So if you're saying it's discerning analysis of language features and you've highlighted something to do with vocabulary, that's a terrible example, then that's not alignment. So if you're telling me over here it's discerning analysis of language features, make sure that you've highlighted language features over here. If you're saying it's discerning use of the blog as a text structure, then you could do, so this is genre. This student is an A, I think. But this is showing knowledge of genre because there's a title. There's a sequencing here. It's actually I didn't particularly like the task myself, but these arrows all over the place are really a bit nasty. So you just use your common sense. If you've got a colour here and you've got bits highlighted over here, I know that they correlate. But you'll need a number of different colours for each of your standard elaborations. Yes?
Have you got a favourite colour scheme?
No, I do not. Go to town. Just make sure I can read it on the screen.
Will we be taking screenshots then from the blog?
Yeah, you can. I mean,
Because it would make it easier considering that if we want to show an example that includes images and things like that as part of it, then it's just easier to do it on an online.
well, there is a template in week 9, and I was figuring that what you could do is copy and paste it over into that Word document with the images in there and then annotate it, because the actual template has 2/3 of the table like this, and then it's got a column down here. It's narrower like this, and that's where you put your standards
So
elaborations in.
do we need to do that though? Because if we're asking them to use a specific software or website, would it not be beneficial to have an example of that specific software or website being used to?
You can, as long as it's easy for me to access.
Okay.
It's about markability for me in this case.
Because I can just take a screenshot, put it into a page, and leave a column for annotation.
As long as I can see your blog from start to finish.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fine. So you might have multiple screenshots underneath each other, and
I respect that, but can we also just do a Word document?
you can. I've actually given you the template, so
Yeah.
use the template that I've provided.
What was that one? It's the second template that you had.
So you can see here